I stared at my phone screen, reading my mother's text for the third time while sitting in my corner office on the 30th floor of the Hancock Tower in Boston. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the Charles River winding through the city, sailboats dotting the water in the late afternoon sun, and the historic brownstones of Back Bay stretching toward the horizon. The message was short, direct, and quintessentially my mother. Sarah, your absence at the gala last night was noted by everyone. You're embarrassing the family. Victoria had to make excuses for you again. I don't know what you do all day in that little apartment of yours, but showing up for family obligations should be manageable. Do better. I set the phone down on my mahogany desk and turned to look at the framed photo next to my computer. It showed a younger version of myself standing between my parents at my college graduation from MIT. My father's arm was around my shoulders, pride radiating from his smile. My mother stood slightly apart, her attention already drifting toward Victoria, who was graduating from Harvard Law that same year. My father, David Miller, had passed away 6 years ago from a sudden heart attack. He'd been 58, seemingly healthy, and gone before any of us could process what was happening. He'd left behind a successful commercial real estate business, a beautiful colonial home in Brookline, and the Miller Family Foundation, a small charitable organization he'd started to give back to the community. My mother, Patricia, had thrown herself into running the foundation after Dad died. It became her purpose, her identity, her way of keeping his memory alive. She organized fundraising galas, golf tournaments, and silent auctions. She networked with Boston's elite, cultivating relationships with donors and board members. The foundation grew under her leadership, funding scholarships for underprivileged students, supporting local food banks, and contributing to medical research. My sister Victoria, 3 years younger than me at 32, had become Mom's right hand in all of it. Victoria was everything our mother had hoped for in a daughter: polished, socially adept, married to a successful cardiologist named Jonathan, living in a pristine Victorian in Newton. She served on the foundation board, brought in corporate sponsors through her law firm's connections, and knew exactly what to say at cocktail parties. And then there was me. To my family, I was the cautionary tale. The brilliant daughter who'd somehow lost her way. I'd graduated summa cum laude from MIT with a degree in computer science, worked briefly at a promising tech startup, and then seemingly disappeared into obscurity. I worked from home now, they knew that much. Something to do with software consulting for small businesses. I lived in a modest apartment in Somerville, drove a 10-year-old Subaru Outback, and rarely attended family events. She's so smart, but she has no ambition, I'd overheard my mother tell a friend at Dad's funeral reception. I don't know where we went wrong with her. What they didn't know was that the startup I'd worked for hadn't just been promising, it had been revolutionary. And when we'd sold it to a major tech company 4 years ago, my shares had been worth $4.2 million. I picked up my phone again and opened my email, finding the one I'd been expecting. The subject line read, "Foundation Donor Recognition Event, Urgent Matter." "Miss Miller," it began. "I hope this message finds you well. As you know, the annual gala was last night, and per our agreement, we managed to avoid acknowledging your contributions publicly. However, we have a situation. The foundation's operating costs have increased significantly, and your anonymous donations have been covering nearly 60% of our program funding for the past 6 years. Mrs. Miller is planning to announce next month that we're launching a new $500,000 medical research initiative. But she doesn't realize that without your continued support, we don't have the funds to sustain our current programs, let alone expand. I believe it may be time to have a conversation with your family about the foundation's actual financial situation. Please advise. Best regards, Thomas Chen, Foundation Executive Director." I leaned back in my leather chair and closed my eyes, letting my mind drift back to the beginning. 6 years ago, 2 months after Dad's funeral, I'd been sitting in a lawyer's office in Cambridge, signing the paperwork for the sale of my startup. The company I'd co-founded with 2 MIT classmates had developed AI-powered logistics software that major shipping companies desperately wanted. After 18 months of 80-hour weeks and living on instant ramen and cold pizza, we'd gotten an acquisition offer we couldn't refuse. My share, after taxes, was $4.2 million. I'd been 29 years old, suddenly wealthy, and deeply, profoundly sad. My father had believed in me when I'd told him about the startup. He'd listened to my pitch at the kitchen table, understood maybe 30% of the technical details, and said, "You're going to change the world, sweetheart. I'm proud of you." He died 3 months before the acquisition. He never got to see me succeed. Sitting in that lawyer's office, I'd made a decision. I would use this money the way Dad would have wanted to help people, to make a difference. But I would do it quietly. No press releases, no recognition plaques, no seats on boards of directors. Just genuine, meaningful impact. The Miller Family Foundation had seemed like the perfect vehicle. Mom was working so hard to keep Dad's legacy alive, and the foundation needed funding. I'd contacted Thomas Chen, who'd just been hired as executive director, and made him an unusual proposal. I want to make a significant donation, I told him over coffee at a small cafe in Harvard Square. But I need it to be completely anonymous. Not just from the public, from my family too. Thomas had been skeptical at first. That's unusual. Most donors want recognition. It's how foundations build relationships and secure future giving. I understand. But this is non-negotiable. I'll provide substantial annual funding, enough to significantly expand your programs. But my mother and sister can never know it's coming from me. May I ask why? I'd hesitated, then decided honesty was necessary if this was going to work. My father and I were close. He believed in me when others didn't. The foundation was his dream, and I want to support it in his memory. But my relationship with my mother and sister is complicated. If they knew this money came from me, it would change the dynamic in ways I'm not ready for. I want them to be proud of the foundation's work, not obligated to me. Thomas had studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I'll need to structure this carefully from a legal and accounting standpoint. The board will need to know there's a major anonymous donor, but I can protect your identity. What kind of commitment are you thinking? $350,000 annually for the next 6 years, with the possibility of more if the foundation demonstrates effective use of funds. His coffee cup had frozen halfway to his lips. That's more than our entire current annual budget. I know. Dad always dreamed bigger than the foundation's resources allowed. Now it can actually fulfill that vision. Over the following 6 years, I'd kept my promise. Every year, through a complex arrangement of LLC structures and legal trusts that Thomas helped me establish, I'd transferred $350,000 to the foundation. The money was documented as coming from the Horizon Legacy Trust, an anonymous donor collective that Thomas had created specifically for this purpose. With that funding, the foundation had flourished. Mom had been able to award full scholarships to 20 students each year instead of 5. The foundation had funded a community health clinic in Dorchester, supported cancer research at Mass General, and created an emergency assistance program for families facing medical bankruptcies. At every board meeting, according to the minutes Thomas discreetly shared with me, my mother would beam with pride. Our anonymous donor continues to believe in our mission, she'd say. Their generosity is changing lives. Victoria would nod, adding, I've been networking with potential corporate sponsors. I think I brought in at least $75,000 in new commitments this year through my firm's connections. The board would applaud her initiative. No one questioned where the bulk of the funding actually came from. Thomas's reports attributed it to diverse revenue streams, including major gift commitments from anonymous benefactors, which was technically true. Meanwhile, I maintained my cover story. I worked from my apartment, they believed, doing small-scale consulting work. I drove my old Subaru and lived modestly. When pressed about my career at family dinners, I'd give vague answers about helping small businesses optimize their systems and quickly redirect conversation. I just don't understand what you do all day, Mom had said at last year's Thanksgiving dinner. Victoria works 70-hour weeks at her firm, manages foundation board responsibilities, and still makes time for family. You work from home in your pajamas and can't even be bothered to attend our fundraising events. I do attend some of them, Mom. Some. Not the important ones. The gala is our biggest event of the year, Sarah. Major donors attend. Board members bring their friends and business associates. It's how we build relationships that sustain the foundation. Your absence sends a message that you don't care about your father's legacy. I'd wanted to tell her then. To explain that I cared more than she could possibly imagine. That I'd given up career advancement opportunities because I was pouring my resources into the foundation. That while she was networking with Boston's elite, I was the elite, or at least, I had enough wealth to be, if I chose to live that way. But I'd stayed silent. Because the foundation's success mattered more than my ego. Because I wanted Mom to feel proud of what she'd built. Because on some level, I was afraid that knowing the truth would make her feel diminished rather than grateful. So I'd endured the disappointed looks, the subtle comments about my lack of ambition, the comparisons to Victoria. At family gatherings, I was the afterthought, the daughter who'd failed to launch, the one who made mom sigh and change the subject when friends asked about her children. Victoria just made junior partner, mom would say brightly. She's being featured in Boston Magazine next month for her work on a landmark environmental case. And Sarah's doing her thing with computers. The thing was, I actually was still doing meaningful work beyond my foundation donations. After the startup sale, I'd taken a position as a senior software architect at a fintech company in Boston's Seaport District. The job was flexible, well compensated, and intellectually stimulating. I led a team of developers, worked on projects that processed billions of dollars in transactions, and had equity in a company that was growing rapidly. But I'd never corrected my family's assumptions. Let them think I was a small-time consultant. It was easier than explaining, and honestly, after years of trying to prove myself, I'd stopped caring about their validation. Or at least, I'd told myself I'd stopped caring. The truth was more complicated. Every dismissive comment stung. Every time Victoria's accomplishments were praised while my existence was barely acknowledged, I felt that familiar ache of being unseen. But I'd made peace with it, or so I thought, by focusing on the impact I was making. The scholarship students who were graduating from college and starting careers. The families who'd gotten life-saving medical treatment because of the Foundation's assistance. The research that was advancing because of our funding. That was enough. That had to be enough. But now, sitting in my office with Mom's latest criticism on my phone and Thomas's email on my screen, I realized that the situation had reached a breaking point. I opened a secure messaging app and typed, "Thomas, I need you to call me." 30 seconds later, my phone rang. "Sarah, I'm sorry to put this on you," Thomas said without preamble. "But your mother is making commitments the Foundation can't sustain without your continued donations, and she's doing it publicly. If you stop funding at your current level, or even if you just maintain without increasing, we'll have to cut programs. Scholarship students who are halfway through college will lose their funding. The health clinic will have to reduce hours. She doesn't understand the math. Because she doesn't know where the money actually comes from." Exactly. She thinks we have a large donor base and that my job is just managing the funds. She doesn't realize that the Horizon Legacy Trust, meaning you, is providing almost 2/3 of our revenue. The other anonymous donors she thinks exist? They're mostly you as well, through different structures. I'd set it up that way intentionally, creating the illusion of multiple revenue streams to make the Foundation's finances seem more sustainable than they actually were. "What about Victoria's corporate sponsors?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from reading the financial reports Thomas sent me quarterly. They exist, but they're modest commitments. 20,000 here, 15,000 there. Good money, don't get me wrong, but nowhere near what we'd need to replace your contributions. Victoria brings in maybe 80 to 90,000 a year total. Your mother thinks it's more because she doesn't review the detailed financials, she just sees that we're flush with funding and assumes Victoria's networking is more effective than it actually is. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache forming. "The new medical research initiative Mom wants to launch, what's that about?" "Cancer research, specifically focused on early detection. It's actually a great cause, and she's passionate about it. But she's already told potential partners we can commit $500,000 over 2 years. Sarah, we don't have that money unless you provide it, and even then, it would mean cutting other programs. Why is she making commitments without consulting you about the budget?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Because she's the founder's widow and the board chair. Because she's used to money being available when we need it. Because, frankly, I think she's so focused on the mission that she's not paying attention to the mechanics. And because I've been protecting you by not revealing how dependent we are on a single donor. That's my fault, not yours. I created this situation. With good intentions. But Sarah, it's not sustainable anymore. You're 35 years old. You can't keep hiding your success from your family forever. And the Foundation needs a more diverse funding base. What happens if something happens to you? What if you decide to move away, or get married and your priorities change? The Foundation would collapse, and dozens of programs would end." He was right. I'd known it for months, but had been avoiding the reality. "The donor appreciation gala I missed last night," I said slowly. "How bad was that?" "Your mother was upset. She'd told the major donors that both her daughters were deeply committed to the Foundation. When you didn't show, she had to explain your absence. Victoria apparently told people you were dealing with a work crisis, which was kind of her, but it highlighted the contrast between Victoria's visible involvement and your apparent disinterest. Even though I fund the entire operation. Even though you fund the entire operation. I stood up and walked to my office window, watching the sailboats on the Charles River. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I need to think about this, I told Thomas. Give me 24 hours. Of course. But Sarah? Whatever you decide, I want you to know that what you've done for this foundation, for all the people we've helped, it's extraordinary. Your father would be incredibly proud. My eyes burned with sudden tears. Thanks, Thomas. After we hung up, I sat back down and opened my laptop. I pulled up the foundation's website and clicked through the programs we funded. There was Jamila, a scholarship recipient who'd graduated last year and was now teaching high school science in Roxbury. Marcus, who was studying engineering at BU on a full ride. The Rodriguez family, whose daughter had received life-saving surgery that the Foundation's medical assistance program had helped pay for. All of it was possible because I'd chosen to give rather than spend. Because I'd lived in a modest apartment instead of buying a house. Because I'd driven a used Subaru instead of a luxury car. Because I'd skipped vacations and avoided expensive restaurants and worn the same professional wardrobe for years. And no one in my family had any idea. My phone buzzed with a new text. Victoria. Hey, I'm sorry about Mom's message. She was stressed about the gala. A bunch of major donors were asking about you, and she felt embarrassed explaining why you weren't there. I covered for you, told them you had a work emergency. Maybe you could call her? She'd appreciate it. Also, Jonathan and I are hosting dinner this Sunday. Please try to come. Love you. Victoria was trying, in her way. She'd always been kinder to me than Mom, even if she didn't understand my life. When we were younger, before the comparison game had gotten so intense, we'd been close. I missed that sometimes. I texted back, thanks for covering. I'll think about Sunday. Work is crazy right now. It wasn't a lie. Work was demanding. But the real reason I avoided family dinners was simpler. I was tired of feeling invisible. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Thomas's words, about the Foundation's future, about the scholarship students and medical patients who depended on funding that my family didn't realize came from me. Around 2 a.m., I got out of bed and made tea, settling on my small balcony to watch the city lights. My apartment was tiny, a one-bedroom with barely enough room for my desk and bed, but it had this balcony with a view of the skyline, and that had been enough for me. I'd chosen this life deliberately. After the startup sale, I could have bought a condo in Back Bay or a house in Brookline. I could have traveled the world, collected art, joined exclusive clubs. Instead, I'd invested most of my windfall in index funds and bonds, kept my lifestyle modest, and directed the returns toward the Foundation. It had seemed like the right thing to do. Dad had always taught us that privilege came with responsibility. That having more meant giving more. That real success wasn't measured in possessions but in positive impact. I'd taken those lessons to heart, maybe more than anyone realized. But somewhere along the way, I'd lost myself in the role of anonymous benefactor. I'd become so focused on funding the Foundation without acknowledgement that I'd created a false narrative about my own life. I'd let my mother and sister believe I was directionless and unsuccessful because maintaining that fiction seemed easier than having difficult conversations. And now, 6 years later, I was trapped in a story of my own making. The next morning, I called Thomas. I've made a decision, I told him. I'm ready to tell them. Are you sure? No. But you're right, this isn't sustainable. The Foundation needs a more diversified funding base, and that starts with transparency about its current situation. Plus, I'm tired of being treated like the family disappointment when I've actually been the family's biggest asset. Thomas laughed softly. I can't argue with that. How do you want to handle this? Is there another event coming up where the major donors will be gathered? Actually, yes. We're hosting a small dinner next month for our top 10 supporters. Usually just the anonymous donors' representatives attend. I've been going in your place, but your mother and Victoria will be there, along with some board members and major corporate sponsors. Perfect. Tell Mom and Victoria that the Horizon Legacy Trust has requested that all major donors attend in person this year, and that they specifically want to meet the Miller family. Make it sound prestigious, like we're being honored. And then you'll reveal yourself? And then I'll reveal myself. But Thomas, I need you to prepare a presentation showing exactly where the foundation's funding has come from for the past 6 years. Every dollar accounted for. I don't want there to be any confusion about the foundation's actual financial situation. I can do that. Sarah. Are you prepared for how they might react? I thought about my mother's text, about years of being dismissed and overlooked, about Victoria's sympathetic but ultimately condescending attempts to include me. Honestly? No. But it's time. The next 3 weeks were surreal. I continued my normal routine, going to my actual office job in the seaport, leading my development team, reviewing code and architecture decisions. But there was a countdown in my head now. 3 weeks until the donor dinner. 20 days. 2 weeks. 1 week. Mom called twice during that time. Once to invite me to a foundation planning meeting, which I declined. Once to ask if I'd be attending Victoria's birthday dinner, which I agreed to because avoiding it would have seemed too suspicious. The birthday dinner was at a high-end restaurant in the South End, the kind of place where entrees cost $50 and the wine list runs to 30 pages. Jonathan had reserved a private room, and besides family, Victoria had invited several friends from her law firm and their spouses. I wore a simple black dress I'd bought at Target 3 years ago, and my usual minimal makeup. Victoria, stunning in a designer cocktail dress, hugged me tightly when I arrived. "I'm so glad you came," she said, and she meant it. "You've been so absent lately. Work's been busy. Isn't it always?" She said it kindly, without judgment, but I still felt the sting. To her, my work was this vague, inconsequential thing that kept me occupied but didn't really matter. During dinner, conversation flowed around me. Jonathan talked about a complex cardiac procedure he'd performed. One of Victoria's law firm colleagues discussed a merger she was negotiating. Mom held court at the end of the table, describing the foundation's plans for the new medical research initiative. "We're partnering with Mass General," she said proudly. $500,000 over 2 years. It's the largest single program investment we've ever made. David would have been so proud. Victoria raised her glass. To Mom, for carrying on Dad's legacy. Everyone toasted. I sipped my water and said nothing. After dinner, as people were saying their goodbyes, Mom pulled me aside. "I'm glad you came tonight," she said. "I know I was harsh in my text about the gala. I worry about you, Sarah. You're so isolated in that little apartment, working these small jobs. I want more for you. Your father would want more for you." Something in my chest cracked open. "What do you think Dad would have wanted, Mom? For you to reach your potential? You were so brilliant at MIT. Everyone thought you'd do something significant with that brain of yours. Instead, you're..." She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. "Wasting it?" "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." I picked up my purse. "I should go. Early morning tomorrow." "Sarah, wait. I didn't mean to upset you." "I'm not upset. Just tired." I kissed her cheek. "Good night, Mom." In my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel and taking deep breaths. 1 more week. I just had to make it 1 more week. The morning of the donor dinner, I woke up with a sense of calm clarity. I'd been anxious for weeks, but now that the day had arrived, I felt oddly at peace. I spent the morning at my regular job, finishing up a code review and meeting with my team about a new project. My boss, Rachel, caught me checking my phone repeatedly. "Big plans tonight?" she asked. "You could say that. Family thing. Well, you've seemed distracted lately. Everything okay?" I smiled. "It will be. Actually, Rachel, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. Remember how I mentioned I had some personal projects I was working on? The charity work? Yeah. It might be becoming more public soon. Just wanted to give you a heads up in case anyone asks questions or if it somehow affects my work here." She looked intrigued but didn't push. "Well, whatever it is, I hope it goes well. You're a great employee, Sarah. We're lucky to have you." It was a small moment, but it reminded me that I had value beyond my family's opinion. I had a career, colleagues who respected me, work that mattered. I went home at 3 and started getting ready. For the first time in years, I made an effort. I'd gone shopping the week before and bought a dress I actually loved, navy blue, sophisticated, elegant, without being flashy. I did my makeup carefully, styled my hair, put on the simple pearl necklace Dad had given me for my college graduation. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because I looked like someone who knew her own worth. The dinner was at a private club in Back Bay, the kind of place where membership costs more than most people's annual salary. I parked my Subaru between a Tesla and a Mercedes and walked to the entrance, my heart pounding. Thomas was waiting in the lobby. When he saw me, his eyes widened. "Sarah. You look ready." "I am. Is everything set?" "Presentation loaded, financial documents ready to distribute. Your mother and Victoria just arrived. They're in the reception area with some board members and corporate sponsors. Everyone's excited to meet the mysterious Horizon Legacy Trust representative." "Then let's not keep them waiting." The reception area was elegant, high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, waiters circulating with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I spotted Mom immediately, resplendent in a designer gown, holding court with several older men in tuxedos. Victoria stood nearby in a stunning emerald dress, laughing at something Jonathan said. Thomas touched my elbow. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be." He walked me toward the group. Mom saw him first, her face brightening. "Thomas. Is our guest of honor here?" "Yes, Mrs. Miller. I'd like to introduce you to Sarah?" Mom's voice was confused, her smile faltering. "What are you doing here?" "This is a private event for major donors." "I know, Mom. I'm here because Thomas invited me." Victoria stepped closer, looking between us with concern. "Sarah, maybe there's been a misunderstanding. This dinner is for the Foundation's most significant supporters." "I know," I said again, my voice steadier now. "That's why I'm here." Mom's confusion was shifting toward irritation. "Thomas, what's going on? Where is the representative from the Horizon Legacy Trust?" Thomas looked at me, and I nodded. "Mrs. Miller, Victoria," he said formally. "I'd like to introduce you to the Horizon Legacy Trust's founder and sole trustee, Sarah Miller." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Victoria's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "That's not funny," Mom finally said. "Sarah, whatever game you're playing." "It's not a game, Mom. I'm the anonymous donor you've been thanking at every board meeting for the past 6 years." "That's impossible. The Horizon Legacy Trust has donated over $2 million to this foundation. You work from home doing small consulting projects. You drive a car that's older than some of our scholarship students. You live in a tiny apartment. You can't even afford nice clothes for." She stopped abruptly, perhaps realizing how hurtful her words were. "Can't afford nice clothes?" I finished quietly. "I can afford them, Mom. I choose not to buy them. There's a difference." Thomas stepped forward with his tablet. "Perhaps we should move this conversation to the private dining room. I have a presentation prepared that explains everything." The dinner that followed was the longest 2 hours of my life. Thomas projected financial statements on a screen while the 10 people gathered, my family, 3 board members, and 4 corporate sponsors, stared in various stages of shock. "As you can see," Thomas explained, clicking through slides, "the Horizon Legacy Trust has contributed $2.1 million to the Miller Family Foundation over the past 6 years. That's an average of $350,000 annually, representing approximately 63% of the foundation's total revenue during that period." He showed charts, graphs, detailed breakdowns of every program we funded and where the money had come from. My contributions were highlighted in blue. Everything else, Victoria's corporate sponsors, individual donations, fundraising events, was in gray. The blue dwarfed the gray. Mom sat frozen, her champagne untouched. Victoria was holding Jonathan's hand so tightly her knuckles were white. Thomas continued. "The trust was established in 2019, shortly after the sale of a tech startup that Miss Miller co-founded. She approached me that year with a proposal to support the foundation anonymously, with specific instructions that her identity remain confidential, even from family members." "Why?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "Why would you do this?" I stood up, my legs shaky but my resolve firm. "Because I wanted to honor Dad. Because the foundation was his dream, and I had the means to make that dream bigger than it could have been otherwise. Because I wanted you to be proud of the work you were doing without feeling obligated to me." "But you let us think," Victoria started, then stopped, seemingly unable to articulate what exactly I'd let them think. "I let you think I was unsuccessful," I said directly. "I let you think I was wasting my potential, that I was the disappointment of the family. Because it seemed easier than having this conversation 6 years ago when I was still figuring out what I wanted to do with my life." "You made fools of us," Mom said, her voice hardening. "You sat there at family dinners while we talked about the foundation's growth, while I thanked our anonymous donors, while Victoria and I worked so hard to bring in new support and you never said a word. Would you have preferred I stood up at Thanksgiving and announced I was rich? I asked. That I'd solved all the foundation's financial problems so you could stop trying? Mom, you love running this foundation. You love the networking, the events, the feeling of making a difference. Would knowing it was my money have made you feel better about any of that? She didn't answer. Victoria did instead. You made us look foolish, Sarah. I've been telling people for years that I'm bringing in significant corporate support. Now I find out that my contributions are, what, 15% of total revenue. Mom's been telling major donors that we have a diverse funding base. That's a lie. It's not a lie, Thomas interjected. You do have multiple funding sources. Miss Miller's contributions, while substantial, are part of a larger philanthropic ecosystem. Don't sugarcoat it, Victoria snapped. My sister has been bankrolling this whole operation while letting us take credit for its success. The hurt in her voice surprised me. I'd expected anger from Mom, but Victoria's pain was unexpected. Vic, I never meant to diminish what you've done. Your corporate connections are real. The relationships you've built matter. Just because my dollars were bigger doesn't mean your work wasn't important. Then why hide it? She stood up, her eyes shining with tears. We're sisters, Sarah. We're supposed to tell each other things. Important things. Life-changing things. You sold your company for millions of dollars and never told me? You've been secretly funding Dad's foundation for 6 years and never told me. What else don't I know about your life? The question hung in the air. What else didn't she know? That I had a high-level job at a successful fintech company. That I led a team of developers and was being considered for a VP position. That I had friends and a life and ambitions that extended beyond the small, sad existence they imagined for me. But before I could answer, Mom spoke. This dinner is over. She stood, her posture rigid. Sarah. I don't know what you were trying to prove with this stunt, but congratulations. You've successfully humiliated your family in front of our colleagues and supporters. Mrs. Miller, one of the board members, interjected gently. With all due respect, I think what Sarah has done is extraordinary. This kind of quiet, sustained generosity is exactly what— Please don't tell me how to feel about my own daughter's deception, Mom said coldly. She looked at me, her eyes hard. You're right that your father would have been proud of the foundation's growth. But he would have been ashamed of the way you let your family believe you were failing while secretly playing puppet master with our lives. She walked out, leaving her purse and wrap behind. Victoria hesitated, looking torn, then followed. Jonathan lingered for a moment. She'll come around, he said quietly to me. This is a lot to process. Just give her time. After they left, the remaining attendees sat in uncomfortable silence. Then one of the corporate sponsors, a woman named Linda who owned a chain of boutique hotels, started clapping slowly. That, she said, was the most dramatic donor reveal I've ever witnessed. And I've been in philanthropy for 30 years. She raised her glass to me. Here's to women who change the world without needing applause. Though perhaps some applause is occasionally appropriate. The others joined her in a toast. I tried to smile, but all I felt was numb. Thomas walked me to my car an hour later, after we'd finished the dinner and had difficult but productive conversations with the board members about the foundation's future funding strategies. That went about as well as could be expected, he said diplomatically. She hated me in there. She was shocked. And embarrassed. And probably feeling a complicated mix of gratitude and resentment and confusion. Give her time, Sarah. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. You've been sitting with this truth for 6 years. She's had 2 hours. He squeezed my shoulder. For what it's worth, I think you were incredibly brave tonight. And I think your father would have been proud not just of the giving, but of the courage it took to finally tell the truth. I drove home in silence, parked my car, and walked up to my little apartment. It felt even smaller than usual, the walls closing in. I changed out of my beautiful dress and into sweatpants, washed my makeup off, and sat on my balcony, looking at the city lights. My phone buzzed with texts. Several from board members praising my generosity. One from Linda inviting me to lunch to discuss quiet philanthropy strategies. And one from Victoria, sent 20 minutes ago. I'm sorry for how I reacted. I'm still processing everything, but I shouldn't have made it about me. What you did for the foundation. For Dad's legacy, it's incredible. I just wish I had known. I wish we could have shared that. Can we talk? Tomorrow, maybe? I texted back. Tomorrow sounds good. Love you. No response from Mom. I hadn't expected one. The next few weeks were strange. The foundation world had somehow gotten word of my revelation, and I started receiving invitations to speak at philanthropy conferences, requests for interviews, inquiries from other nonprofits. Thomas fielded most of them, protecting my privacy as he always had. Victoria and I met for coffee 3 days after the donor dinner. She apologized more fully, explained that she'd felt betrayed but understood why I'd kept the secret. We talked for 3 hours. Really talked. In a way we hadn't since we were kids. I told her about my actual job, my team, the projects I was working on. She told me about the pressures of being a junior partner, of trying to live up to Mom's expectations, of sometimes feeling like she was performing success rather than living it. We're more alike than I realized, she said at one point. Yeah. We are. Will you come to Sunday dinner this week? Please. I know Mom is still difficult. But I miss you, and I think Jonathan and I need a buffer. I laughed. I'll be your buffer. Sunday dinner was at Victoria's house in Newton. Mom was there, civil but cool. She asked me to pass the salt. She commented on the weather. She asked Jonathan about his work. She did not acknowledge the elephant in the room. After dinner, while Victoria and Jonathan were clearing dishes, I found Mom standing alone on the back patio, looking at their garden. Victoria has a beautiful home, I said softly, stepping outside. She's worked very hard for it. I know she has. Silence stretched between us. Then, without looking at me, Mom spoke. Your father used to worry about you. The words startled me. What? After you graduated from MIT, when you joined that startup, he worried that you were too idealistic, that you'd get hurt, that you were putting all your energy into something that might fail. I told him you'd be fine, that you were brilliant and capable. He said, I know she's brilliant. I just want her to be happy. My throat tightened. I didn't know he worried. He loved you so much, Sarah. He believed in you in a way that. She finally looked at me, her eyes wet. In a way I haven't always shown. Mom. Let me finish. Please. She took a shaky breath. When he died, I threw myself into the foundation because I didn't know what else to do with my grief. And somewhere in that process, I started measuring success in the wrong ways. I looked at Victoria's visible achievements and felt proud. I looked at your quiet life and felt disappointed. I never stopped to ask if you were happy, if you were fulfilled, if you were living the life Dad would have wanted for you. Tears were streaming down my face now. And now I find out that you've been living exactly the life he would have wanted. Giving generously, helping others, honoring his memory in the most meaningful way possible. And instead of feeling grateful, my first reaction was anger. Because you made me look foolish. Because I've been taking credit for success that was really yours. Because I'm your mother and I should have known, should have seen. She was crying too now. I failed you, Sarah. I failed to see you. And I'm so sorry. I hugged her, and she held me tightly, both of us crying on Victoria's patio while our family's future hung in the balance. I should have told you, I whispered. Years ago. I should have trusted that you'd understand. Maybe. But I understand why you didn't. I hadn't earned that trust. We stayed there for a long time, holding each other while the sun set over Newton. The next day, Mom called a special board meeting. With Thomas's help, she presented a new strategic plan for the foundation. I would be invited to join the board as a full member. My donations would continue but at a reduced level, allowing the foundation to actively cultivate other major donors and build a truly diversified funding base. Victoria would lead that cultivation effort, using her networking skills to bring in new supporters who were genuinely interested in the mission. Most importantly, the foundation would be transparent about its funding history. No more pretending that money appeared magically. No more allowing one person to carry the financial burden alone. This foundation was my husband's dream, Mom told the board. But it has been my daughter's reality. Moving forward, it will be our shared mission built on honesty, sustained by diverse support, and guided by the values David Miller instilled in all of us. The board approved the plan unanimously. 6 months later, I stood in the same private club where I'd revealed my secret, attending another donor dinner. But this time, I wasn't alone. Victoria was there, having just announced 3 new corporate sponsorships totaling $200,000. Mom was there, having successfully recruited 2 other major individual donors who believed in the foundation's mission. And I was there, no longer anonymous, no longer hiding. When it came time for the traditional toast, Mom raised her glass and looked directly at me. To my daughter Sarah, who taught me that the most powerful form of love is the kind that asks for nothing in return. To the Miller Family Foundation, which is stronger today because one woman had the courage to give without recognition and the courage to stop hiding when recognition became necessary. And to David Miller, who knew all along that his brilliant daughter would change the world. She has. And she will continue to do so. Everyone drank. I wiped my eyes. Victoria reached over and squeezed my hand. Later, as the event was winding down, a young woman approached me nervously. She was about 22, professionally dressed, carrying a portfolio. Miss Miller? I'm Jamila Chen. I don't know if you remember, but I was one of the foundation's first scholarship recipients 6 years ago. I graduated from Boston University last year and I'm teaching science now at a high school in Roxbury. I remember, I said, smiling. You wrote beautiful thank you notes every semester. I wanted to write them to you personally, but I didn't know who you were. The foundation just said an anonymous donor had made my scholarship possible. She pulled out an envelope. So I wrote this 6 years ago and I've been carrying it ever since, hoping I'd meet you someday. It's a thank you letter. For changing my life. For making it possible for me to become a teacher. For believing in students like me. She handed me the envelope, her eyes shining with tears, and walked away before I could respond. I opened it later that night, sitting on my balcony with a cup of tea. The letter was dated September 2019, a few months after I'd started the anonymous donations. Dear unknown benefactor, it began. I don't know who you are, but I want you to know that you've saved my life. Not just my educational future or my career prospects, my actual life. Before this scholarship, I was planning to drop out of school and work full-time to help my family. Now I can dream bigger. I can become the teacher I've always wanted to be. I can give back to my community. I can prove that a girl from Dorchester can make it, can matter, can change the world. You gave me that chance. I don't know why you chose to help students like me without wanting recognition or thanks. But please know that your generosity isn't just funding my education, it's funding hope. And hope is the most valuable gift anyone can give. I will carry your kindness with me always, and I will pass it forward to the students I teach. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. With eternal gratitude, Jamila Chen. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face, and I finally understood what my father had known all along. Success isn't measured in dollars or recognition or family approval. It's measured in lives changed, in hope restored, in the quiet knowledge that you've made the world better than you found it. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give yourself is letting people see you for who you really are, not because you need their validation, but because truth is the foundation of every relationship worth having. I texted Victoria. Thank you for not giving up on me. She responded immediately. Thank you for teaching me what real strength looks like. And from Mom, a few minutes later. Your father was right about you. He was always right about you. I love you, Sarah. I looked out at the city lights, at the life I'd built in the shadows, and I felt, for the first time in 6 years, completely, authentically seen. And it was enough. Finally, it was more than enough.